Good morning, afternoon, day, evening, whatever it is to all you folks, whether you're in Oak Grove or Milwaukee or wherever else. Welcome to another episode of the Naked Sermon Podcast. I am Jesse from Milwaukee. I'm here with Sarah this week.
Hey, y'all.
Heyo.
From Storyline.
From Storyline, yes. And we're still in the Gospel of John. Yep, still there after many weeks of John.
So 6 weeks of Easter.
Yeah, I know, right?
Easter is such a big mystery that we have to spend 6 weeks talking about the resurrection. And we still don't know. We still don't understand it.
It's normally not that bad. Like if we were in year A where we're reading Matthew, and then we kind of get like the mix of post-resurrection text. But since we're in John, we just get this lectionary year. Anyways, I could rant.
Wordy words every week.
Wordy words. That's John. John got a D in Greek. And I'm being... Anyway, so we're in John chapter 17, and the specific set of verses that we're reading is 6 through 19. But as always, if you want to read the whole chapter, go for it. I think that's always a great thing to do. So feel free to pause your video or audio and find...
Are we going to have them read the Acts story too?
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Sorry.
We're going to throw Peter in at the end too.
We had mentioned that, and I space cadetted. The other story that we're reading is from the book of Acts in chapter 1. And it's kind of one of those where they cut verses out. So it's like 15 to 17 and 21 to 26. But you can just kind of read straight through if you don't want to try and remember which verses you weren't supposed to read, because reading all the verses in the Bible is dangerous, apparently.
I really think it's just people trying to plan an hour-long worship service.
Yeah.
And like, these verses aren't necessary. Like, we'll ease it up on the worship leaders.
I think it's also just like they're being sensitive to the poor preacher that is always being confronted at the end of the service. Like, but what about those verses? That was hard stuff. I don't have time today. Talk to me on Tuesday. So again, John 17 through 6 through 19 and Acts 1, 15 through 17 and
21 through 26.
21 through 26. So go ahead, pause your audio or video and read it. Open up your book and come back to us. And hey, you're back. Great.
Magic.
Magic. So I want to open today with a little bit of a rant just about John in general. So I record worship for Milwaukee Lutheran, and I've been lately recording the gospel text separately from the sermon for reasons. I had to record this stupid thing like 4 times because it is so... I'm really trying hard to avoid 4-letter words here. It is so stupid hard. Because you read it? Have you noticed?
Oh yeah, no, I like when John does this, I tend to like skim read it for the you know what I mean? I'm like, oh, John. Oh, this part.
It's a freaking... It's like a soup of pronouns.
Yeah.
Like I and me and them and you. It's like, have you ever heard the Abbott and Costello skit?
Yeah.
On First. That's what I think of every time I read this.
Yeah, no, and like John has a couple of sections where it gets like that. I skim read this and then I was like, oh, hey, that sounds a lot like stuff we're talking about in like land and housing cohort work, where we talk about the world as it is and the world as it should be. Like the path of the gospel is moving us from the world as it is to the world as it should be, right? The end. There, I said it better, John.
And the world as it should be would involve John using proper grammar and not just random pronouns when he feels like. Anyways, so this story in general is essentially, it's the final discourse that Jesus has in the Gospel of John, and he's praying in front of his disciples. So it's kind of this awkward kind of like pastor prayer thing that we do so often, where we're praying, but we're also kind of doing a performative prayer where we're also kind of doing a mini sermon. So that's what's happening here. You might have noticed that happened before. So that's what's happening here. Like, this is definitely legitimate, genuine Jesus praying on behalf of the people that he loves. And he's got a message that he's trying to convey as well, too. And kind of core to this message all revolves around the word world here. And Sarah,
Which is funny because like that sort of performative prayer would piss Matthew off.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Pray in secret.
Like here's what I want is instead of like March Madness, I want to like pit all the gospel writers against each other, like in a like wrestling
I love this.
pit, right? And be like, who, you know what I mean?
I feel at the end of the day,
John gets so flowery at the end in the like end discourse where like in like Luke and Matthew are just like.
I feel like at the end of the day, though, the synoptics would all team up on John.
Probably. That's like probably what it would do. But John gets super flowery at the end. Like this is the final discourse, right? And John just like blows, like John does this like all of these things. And Luke and Matthew are like, hey, I'm leaving. It's your job. Bye.
And Mark's sitting over in the corner, like talking to himself.
Yeah. Yeah, so like that, like the context of this in like the end discourse, right, is like John's wordy words just get like wordier and wordier and more verbose, and then you're like, oh, it must be near the end because John's using more words.
That would be an interesting study to do, would be like to track John's grammar progressively across the gospel. Would be
I think he just like, because John's so like, I mean, John's so taken with like the cosmology of like Jesus. And so when and cosmology is a big word, right? It's like the unit, like the expansiveness of Jesus' role, right? So like it feels like he, like as an author, the end discourse, he's just trying to like capture all that cosmology and just like literally gets tripped up on his pronouns. Like,
I think you're probably right.
And really, like, I think that's what's so, I mean, for me, it takes a lot of like brain work to get through all of his pronouns to see like, what's your point, John? And I think like, I'm not joking, that whole like moving the world as it is to the world as it should be is like really the core movement. And then what does it mean for us to echo that movement when we embrace the role of Jesus? Like naming, and this is something that John doesn't do, right? So like then like I feel challenged based on your annoyance and my annoyance with John's like verboseness. Verbosity.
That's a good question.
Ooh.
We need to have like a technical support person on this podcast that just like Google's vocabulary for us.
Story's job is to edit over us with correct grammar. Anyway, so the verbosity of John, like you have to wade through it. I'm going with verbosity. But like to name what is the world as it is right now, and then to look to the horizon and the expansiveness and the invitation of Jesus. What is the world as it should be? And that's really like all we're saying here.
Absolutely. And like, and you can see it. I mean, so it's, coincidence that, you're talking about John's cosmology, which, opens up in John 1. In the beginning was the word. It's this mirroring of Genesis 1. But the repetition of the word world here. So the word in Greek for world is cosmos. So that's kind of the wordplay that's going on here. But one of the things that always challenges people in reading this is how John seems to be kind of critiquing, or I'm sorry, Jesus seems to be critiquing the world, almost setting up like this exclusionary sense of like, well, these are my disciples. These are the only ones that I'm talking about, but everybody else, heck with them, heck with the world.
There's a temptation to like disconnect ourselves from like the world, even in light of, and I think that's why it's so important to understand like John's like overall overarching pattern in the way that he sets Jesus up, because like he does open his opening narrative with that echo of the creation narrative of like what you said before we started recording, like the formation out of chaos, right? And that's like that's where we're going here. And so it's not, I think people sometimes, the way I've seen this passage abused is to separate that whole like narrative of like, oh, as a Christian, I don't need to pay attention to the world, right? Because the world is evil and I'm going to separate myself. But we ourselves are created from, like, we are formed out of chaos. And so, and that's very much how John sees like our role as humanity. So like, it's just a disconnect when you pull this passage out of the rest of John.
Well, and it's like a reversal is what they do is they essentially the image they're creating um is that the people that follow Jesus are this subset of the world that is going to be saved, right? To advance to the kingdom of heaven. I mean,
If you're listening on the podcast and not watching,
I was doing
Jesse
scare
just did
quotes.
some very sarcastic air quotes.
Yeah. Yeah, this is where rapturism comes out of, I think,
Right.
too, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like we're the world is awful and broken, everything except this little pocket of people that love Jesus just like I do, that everything else is bad. When in actuality, what Jesus is describing is the reverse, right? So I mean, again, Gospel of John is all about cosmic universality, like this big picture stuff. That's how John opens up. And when Jesus uses the word world here, I mean, this is so tough because it's like he would have been speaking in Aramaic, but the whole text is in Greek. So I wonder if he was using the Greek word. But so cosmos comes from the word, it's a verb, komiso, which means to adorn or to form. So this gives us insight into like how the Greeks understood what the world was, and for them, the world was the ordering of chaos, and it was very much like anthropocentric, right? Like
Yeah.
humanity, and specifically in this context, empire, forms the world, and because everybody else is barbarians, everybody else is in wilderness, so to speak. They're in chaos and an uncivilization.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas what the world is the world is the space that has been ordered. It's where civilization is. Citizens are part of the world. Everybody else is out. And so what Jesus is talking about is what Jesus is critiquing is not the cosmic, the big world. He's critiquing this image of the world, which is so anthropocentric, and really, in this specific context, the world that is described by those in power.
Right.
And so, again, because like, what are they walking into? They're literally walking into the hands of those in power. And that's what Jesus is praying about. He's like, we're gonna enter into this crap show, and I know it's gonna go bad, and still I'm praying on behalf of these folks.
Right. Well, and I think that's an important distinction too. So we have the movement of like world as it is to world as it should be, and then the word study of world and cosmos, right? That there's a concept of like world in this all-encompassing, like sort of like mysterious, beautiful, expansive chaos. And then there's like what we as Western 21st century Christians inherited of like the difference between like God's world versus the world, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. And that we want to separate ourselves from that, but we're not immune from being actors in that either, right? And I think that's something that we in trying to parse John end up being too orderly about, right? Yeah. There's formation out of chaos, and then there's like the Greek concept of putting order to the chaos. And I think that's so the commentary and working preacher from it's one of the professors at Union, and he listed off all the like worldliness things, and I was like, yes. And it was like all the big words like necropolitics, right? I love that word, right?
Yeah,
like the politics of death, right?
Yeah.
Necropolitics and patriarchy and misogyny, and all of those things are like the world that we want to work out, right? Not disconnect ourselves from and pretend like it doesn't exist, but to form something out of the chaos and the oppression that shows up in those systems, right? To form the world as it should be. And I think that that's really our call and our challenge in the gospel movement is like that it's not just like separating ourselves out. That's the easy way to go, right? The hard, difficult, like Christocentric way of doing that work is to say, man, like, yeah, our political system is screwed up. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah, and I would even go further, like, because like I also love that word necropolitic, and for me, I think one of the things about it is it's not just about like the politics of killing, because certainly that is an aspect, but for me, the image that is in my mind is like literally the politics that are dead, right? So it's the world which thrives on stagnation, right? And stagnation and the status quo. So in many ways, that's exactly what Jesus is critiquing here, is he's saying, like, the world that is hurtful, that he's wanting to save the disciples from, is the one that's trying to maintain the status quo of power as it is. And it's the world where it's the ordering of chaos. But the problem is when you order the chaos and set that in stone, there is no room for change or transformation.
Right.
Like, chaos is necessary because it's only through, and I love the Genesis 1 image of like life being breathed in to the chaos, is that it's only through chaos that change and transformation can occur. So like you talk about, wanting to embrace the world that is, in the hopes of becoming the world that should be. You can't get there if you just decide to like shelter and isolate, right? Because that's a lot of what, in a lot of ways, what the harmful reading of this encourages us to do, is say, well, I guess Jesus just wants us to, shut ourselves into our little enclaves and live a holy life. But like, you can't live a holy life that way, because you've cut yourself off from the source of light.
Right. And what is, and the connectedness. Oh, this is such a good, oh man, this is the one time where I'm going to give props to the RCL for like this being a good tee up for Pentecost.
It
right?
is a great tee up
like,
for Pentecost.
It's such a good tee up for Pentecost, because that order, the formation out of chaos, the like connectivity, right? The like proverbial mysterious strings that sort of tie and connect us all together. Like, I am inevitably connected to necropolitics. I am inevitably connected to the patriarchy. I'm both formed out of that disorderliness, as well as being formed out of the chaos of the cosmos, right? And so how do I work within that? And this is where I think John gets tripped up on his pronouns, right? Because what pronouns do you even use to talk about not completely separating yourself, but staying connected to your identity in God and your identity as part of this world, and working your way through that, like that, like, right? I need a whiteboard to like map that.
And I always wonder too, and this is a question I will never have answered, is like, how much of the language awkwardness is the transition from Aramaic to Greek? Because God, Lord knows, me trying to translate anything into French is just a nightmare. And my wife is always, well, that's a long story, but
correcting
like,
you.
yes, nonstop. It's such a, I'm trying to create a martyr of myself. Anyways, but like doubling down on what you were talking about, like embracing the world, that's how Jesus closes this passage, is he says, and he's, again, it's kind of this awkward, I'm talking to God, but I'm also talking in front of these dudes. As you have sent me.
Really would hate this.
Totally. But he said, I mean, so he describes what it means to be sanctified, which again, great tee up to Pentecost. He says, sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. So like, in many ways, what Jesus is talking about is actually the way that you are sanctified, or you become more holy, is by intentionally entering into the world as it is. It's and again, it's a direct critique and a direct contrast against the temptation to saying, you know what, it's tough, I'm just gonna lock myself in my little world, the little world that I've created, that I have ordered out of the chaos, and I'm gonna stay here.
Right. Well, and I think maybe like one thing in reflection of maybe why like John is like obviously so different from the rest of the Gospels is John is written like, a generation after Matthew and Luke. And so it's very clear by the time John is recording John's gospel that like the coming, right, of the kingdom is not like a tomorrow thing. Oh, but like John's interested in the long game, right? So because for Matthew and Luke, there's still this hint of like, and I think that it shows up a lot more in Matthew and Luke, the tendency to think that like we need to separate and sanctify ourselves for the coming, right? Because like early Christians really thought that was like
right around the corner.
right around the corner, right? And here we are thousands of years later, and we're still waiting for it. I think John gives us a little bit more space to think about the long game of moving ourselves into the world as it should be, right? We like, and that's actually like the constant movement of God.
And there's something further to this too. I mean, I should have thought of this, but I mean, specifically with the context of John, because, you know, John is written it's a generation after the synoptics, and it's written in a world where, in many ways, the Christian movement has finally kind of like crystallized. Like, they've realized it's no longer a Jewish reform movement. They've realized it's something new that's beginning. And also what's happening during this time is this is like at the height of Christian persecution too. So there's a lot of, and this is why you get this, you know, potentially anti-Semitic language in John of like the Jews, is that,
Right.
you know, Christianity is having a rough go of it. So like John's audience is doubly experiencing the temptation to just like become the little enclave, to like
Right.
reduce, you know, a reductionist world that is comprised solely of, you know, these few Christians who come out of it. And what John is calling people to, what Jesus is calling people to, is a direct counter to that. Like, that's such an important thing to understand here. And like here, you know, finally, this is a really important time, is that's what we're experiencing in the 21st century too, is that like we're realizing the world is simultaneously a bigger and a smaller place than it was even a year ago or 2 years ago, right? And we're all, you talked about being interconnected. I mean, this is one of the other side effects of the pandemic, is realizing how much, you know, one thing on the other side of the globe can affect so quickly.
Well, and I think like that's the, like, I mean, it's very clear to us now that like there's going to be no ordering of this chaos, right? And so then the question becomes, how do we practice forming new life out of the chaos, right? What is the practice of that?
So often when we want to order the chaos, what we actually want to do is return to the way things were.
Right, exactly.
We're trying to maintain.
That's why I love, like, this is a good end to the Acts story, right? Because this is like one of my favorite things, right? It's like they're choosing a new disciple because for some reason they have to have 12, right? Like they want it to be the way Jesus said it, like Jesus set it up with 12, right? So we got to choose a new disciple. And instead of like, they're just like literally, like, it's so chaotic, right? They're drawing freaking straws. Like, who's gonna be the next one?
This is like, we were talking about this ahead of time. I love this story so much. It's such a sacred cow story too. Like 12 is the magic number. And I always think of like Monty Python, right? You know, you shall count to 3.
12 shall be the number. The number shall be the number. 12. No more, no less. 13, not 11, but 12. Yeah, exactly. So we can debate where they got this from, but like I love the process, right? Because instead of I mean, and like you pointed this out too, the guy they're replacing was stoned to death. Right?
What a great gig to step into. How many applicants do they have for that job?
Who's gonna replace him?
Must have really good benefits.
I know, right? But also, like, if they really wanted to be like orderly about this and concerned, even like concerned with like their reputation as like the Jesus 12 disciples, they could be like, man, the last guy really screwed it up. We better be super careful about how we choose the next guy, right? And like, you know what I mean? Like, they could have been very overly orderly about this. Right? But instead they are practicing what Jesus left them, which is to like let spirit move them. Literally, right? They're just, they're just like
straws.
You know, like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Let's see what happens. But like and that's how they choose the replacement for the guy that really screwed up in living into this like world as it is, world as it should be movement.
Well, and that's such a beautiful way of just describing the situation in general too, because like, I mean, this is the thing at the end of the day too, like the other choice they have is just not to replace Stephen and say, well, okay, I guess with just 11 of us now, but you know, we're going to keep the faith as it is. But in many ways, what they're doing is significant in that it's a sign of, well, we don't know where we're going. We don't know what we're doing. We're going to literally draw straws to get somebody new, but we need to move in. We need to progress. We need to keep going.
Right.
Not knowing that we have no control over the situation. And that for me is like, you know, this is it, right? It's like, we see control as returning to the way things were, when in reality, you know, the relinquishing of control is important to bring in the new world. So
right. And I think the naming of chaos as like beautiful and necessary.
yeah.
Right. Like ready, set, Pentecost, right? like,
Ready, set, tongues of fire.
Right, here we go. Like it's just like see what happens. But I think that I don't know, like I'm agitated by it and invited into it at the same time.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it is a great entry into Pentecost, you know, the day of the year where we just say, let's just set it on fire.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Yeah, leave it up to that, which is really fun. So the next week on Naked Sermon, we're getting really connected. So I'm preaching with the Reverend Jules Nilsson from Portsmouth Union, part of our collaborative work in the Land and Housing Coalition. And so it'll be a fun, like, just throw spaghetti at the wall web of relationships. So that'll be our podcast next week, is that stuff. And we're doing more of it. She's really organized, right? So she's got our I was like, okay, so we don't usually do prep for our podcast, but can we?
My only request is that one of you at least at some point uses the word burninate.
we're getting into we're doing spaghetti and threads and cool. Mary Poppins. There's all kinds of stuff. So we'll be good.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So cool. This is a good tee up for all of that, I think.
It is. It is indeed. Well, great. Any final words, Sarah?
Yeah. Go into the world.
Yeah. I'm just happy that we managed to fit Monty Python in. I think that's a marker of a successful podcast. Cool. Well, Storyline MLC folks from wherever you're in, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Naked Sermon podcast, and make sure that you tune in next week for a special episode with Sarah and Jules. They're going to be rocking the spaghetti and burninating. All right. Peace.